Fantastic. Fantastic. So I have a question for you. I want to circle back to the Iranian situation, but how the Americans handled it in terms of media exposure compared to social media and what happened in 1979. When we were kids, there
Hmm.
were literally four
Yeah.
TV stations. And when the Iranian hostage
Three. There were
situation,
only three back then.
well, I'm counting
Three
PBS,
national. Oh, got it. Yeah.
okay? I'm
Yeah.
counting CBS, NBC, ABC, PBS,
Yeah.
public broadcasting
Yeah.
system for
Got it.
anyone outside of the US, which is the government funded station.
Or was until recently. Go on.
True. Thank you. The Kennedy Center thanks you for your
Yeah.
editorial comment. Um, Here's the question. You had basically these four stations with four news programs on there. And you got the news programs every night about Iran. And it was pretty much a homogeneous sentiment that was created.
Hmm.
Okay? Very straight laced, streamlined. There wasn't much disagreement when we were kids. I never heard someone in the US on a news media site say, well, I think Iran is right to take the hostages. And I don't
No.
think the
Yeah.
hostages should come.
Right.
That did not happen. Nowadays, I'm not going to talk about who did it or why they did it, but there's so many media sites, hundreds of them, that people get from the four corners of the world, globe, whatever we want to call it, and everyone has a different opinion. Okay.
Hmm.
I actually heard people supporting Iran. Okay, they're entitled to their opinion. My point about this is it's amazing how social media has changed the way that news develops, is consumed,
Hmm.
perceived by the public. And it's just interesting to me. I mean, Britain has actually warned students here for the coming fall semester that they have to be braced for being offended and shocked. They're warning students that they're actually going to be more aggressive, less politically correct when they're teaching students this coming fall in Britain. With all of the stuff that's going on, with the advent of 100, 200 different media sources, do you think this is why culture is splintered as much as it is nowadays? That in a way,
Yeah.
back in 1979, we had these four stations. You know, you
Yeah.
know,
Absolutely. I mean, everybody was sort of on the same page because they would be getting the same kind of media. So a couple things happened in there that you didn't mention, but I agree with all that. One of the things was during the Reagan administration, he signed a bill that began to change how we get news today. Up until then, there was this thing called broadcast standards. The wire service is still used. These where they have, in most of the
mhm,
mainstream newspapers, where you have to have a couple of, you can't just have one source. There's all these rules in place so that you make sure you get the story as accurate as possible. And then how the reporter might color that based on his own political views or hers, then, it could change. But the facts remain the same nonetheless. That was much more mainstream back then. Everybody took it for granted. But in around 1989, I think, all of that started to very subtly change. And that's when you saw Fox News, where he was on the sidelines looking and seeing, oh, these point counterpoint things that were on a normal news
mhm.
broadcast were the most interesting things about them, where it was just two people from different political stripes arguing about some point. And it was so prevalent that it was made fun of in the early years of Saturday Night Live back in the 70s and
Mhm.
80s.
Yeah, man.
Um,
Well,
Remember that
remember
Jane,
there
you
was
ignorant slut, and all that,
yeah,
huh?
yeah, but remember there was Firing Line with William Buckley on
Yeah, yeah.
PBS
On
starting in the
PBS,
60s,
yeah. So there
and
were
then
there was some stuff, and there were and then you'd have like live events
on
where like Hinckley and Brokaw or whoever were
mhm,
talking back and forth on some thing going on. Well, that always sort of energized people. So Murdoch and others, but Murdoch in particular, saw that and thought, why not? He was seeing that
but it started on
CNN.
CNN There you
CNN was
go.
starting out, and that was intended to be just news all the time. But you did have people with
Mhm.
personalities discussing things. So Murdoch kind of thought, well, what if you just have it be mostly these discussion parts, and we'll see if we can get ratings that way, and it'll be something that it's more conservative minded, and we'll paint the others as liberal, even though they mostly weren't, but there was some of that going on. So then
You
that's when
had
these different camps started. And when that started happening, lo and behold, look, just technology advances. You wind up with everybody with an opinion in a personal computer. They're sending emails. They're, going into chat rooms. And then the next thing you know, all of a sudden there's social media. And at that point, everybody's used to having their own opinion, hiding behind a screen. And, you just see all this vitriol. And the way these social media companies work, TikTok is an obvious example, as is Facebook. If you're used to posting in a certain thing with a certain opinion, you're going to be seeing and commenting on opinions that are similar to yours that you like, rather than outside opinions that you don't like. And it becomes these echo chambers. So everybody's opinions start growing and growing and growing and becoming more entrenched. Now we have this world today, and yeah, I think that's kind of it in a microcosm.
I think that it is an echo chamber a lot of the time. Like you said, I think people prefer to preach to the chorus because this way there's no vitriol coming back at them. Who was it? It was Buchanan and Novak on
Mm.
CNN when they would sit down and speak to each other. What was that? They were arguing with each other. That was, those were some of the personalities back in the 80s
Hmm.
when this was going on, as you point. And then, of course, you didn't mention we had the TV, radio
Oh, radio
personalities
stations, of
started
course.
coming out.
Rush
Rush
Limbaugh,
Limbaugh,
right? Yeah.
yeah. Howard Stern
Good
on the
point.
other side,
Good
maybe.
point.
You know?
Howard was much more conservative in his viewpoints back then, and then
Yeah,
he
yeah,
started getting more
he's
middle of the road. And now he's more liberal.
yeah, yeah. So let's talk about TikTok for a second. Do you have any inside information who TikTok is going to be sold to in 2 weeks?
I
Trump has been teasing this.
I know.
Do you want to make an announcement for,
No,
YouTube and Spotify and Apple and everyone else here?
I don't have any inside information. I do I well, I mean, I have some. I know people involved in who I thought was going to buy it, and they confirmed to me that they were talking about it. I'm not going to say who that is. I don't know if they're involved anymore. I think that what's
Trump has said in
interesting.
2 weeks' time he's going to
Yeah.
announce who's interested,
So
apparently.
if it's announced who that group or individual is, I'll let you know after the fact if my intel was correct. I think it could be someone different that I'm not aware of, because it sounds like there's a whole lot of new people that are very quietly trying to buy influence or to gain influence somehow. It's interesting. There's these Trump coin things. They're completely unregulated, so people can buy these Trump coins and put as much money as they want into it, gain influence that way, and people on the outside won't know. So it could be someone coming in around the back door that way. Who knows? The big thing remains, which is that the Chinese government is very involved in. They're part owners of ByteDance, as with most large media companies.
Mhm.
Um, China's said in the past that they won't allow the algorithm to be sold, and without that, you have a brand name, and then you have to sort of approximate the algorithm, spending a lot of money for all of it.
Okay,
Um,
so let's stay on the subject of China. There's been a lot of chatter from analysts who watch China that there is a leadership change afoot
mhm.
and that this might become very public in August. I'm not asking you if you know anything. Obviously, you don't. And, this is an internal matter in China. But it is interesting for the rest of the world. Economically, China had manufacturing numbers that showed a contraction again yesterday. As we know, China's economic numbers are always interesting for investors, but the nation has been struggling economically since
Yeah,
before COVID, and COVID
well
hit it
before
hard.
COVID. Yeah.
Question regarding not the leadership change, which might be underway, it appears, okay, via a few sources. What do you think the real population of China is? Do you think that they inflate the numbers of their population?
I don't think they. inflate the numbers of their population, but they definitely, and I think it's just slightly below India's now. So it's probably about 1.35 is my guess, billion
The
people.
official population is 1.4,
Yeah, I'm
but
thinking that it's probably closer to 1.35 because the one child policy really ran havoc, and since then, around 2016, they changed it to two children, and now it's like, well, three, maybe more, but nobody's going along with that. They're having a population decline, and
right.
and then there's a lot of youth employment numbers that they do doctor a little bit allegedly, and
Yeah,
then
yeah,
that
the
factors
economic
into
numbers
the
have always been
economic numbers, which
questioned.
they've always sort of inflated or deflated depending on how you look at it.
But
So
it's the population numbers
yeah,
that are a bit wild. There are other governments. China doesn't release an official census, okay? You don't really have any satellite organizations working inside of China besides the government reporting statistically about the population.
right.
And even Russia, a couple years ago, questioned the population size in China and said they believed the actual population size in China was about 800 to 900 million people.
Did they really?
Okay.
I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, they
Huh.
did. You know,
Hmm.
it's so people, the analysts, the so-called Beijing watchers, just like the old Kremlin watchers, check electrical consumption, they check food consumption, and one of the interesting things that they watch is how much salt China is using,
Huh.
buying from
Mm-hmm.
international markets. And they
Interesting.
said that it's dropping dramatically.
Hmm.
Now, maybe China's taking salt from domestic sources. That could be too. But it's it's interesting because you've always brought up the fact that this is a society and culture where it's important. Image is very important.
Mm-hmm.
You want to be consistent. You want to be confident. You want to be
You need to project strength to your people and to the world around you.
yeah, but at the same time in a stable manner. You know,
Yeah,
try
correct.
not to be pompous about it culturally, because that's frowned upon. However, what's interesting here is that by saying that their population is so strong, 1.4 billion people, instead of the potential 800 to 900 million people,
Mm-hmm.
that basically has a different stature. You know, if they had to admit their population was much smaller, what would
Mm-hmm.
that do psychologically to nations that have to deal with China? Just wondered. Just
Hmm.
wondered. I don't know.
Um. Yeah. I mean, I don't know, but it would obviously, if that's quite a discrepancy. That's
Quite a
nearly half a
discrepancy.
billion people you're talking about that are
Yeah,
suddenly not existent. Um, obviously it has repercussions for their defense. It has repercussions for their economy, their numbers.
mm-hmm.
But that's such a huge discrepancy that I don't know how that would be because there's a lot of other groups that do sort of you know look at these factors and usually what you hear is just gradually it's become where it wasn't 1.4 but it's now a little less than that and then it'll consistently begin to taper off just like we saw with Japan and a lot of Western countries where people just
A
have
lot
less
of Western
kids.
countries.
Yeah,
There
but I
are
don't know if you could.
population problems in a lot of places.
Yeah.
Italy, France,
Yeah.
England.
Mm-hmm. Even here somewhat, but up until now, you had immigration numbers that were keeping buoyancy there, so we could continue to
Yeah,
grow
exactly.
economically. Right.
And this is part of a whole political argument going on
Yeah.
throughout the world at this point.
All content on the Risk Reward Show is for entertainment purposes only and not to be construed as financial advice. The hosts are idiots. They don't know what they're doing. They're not financial advisors. Come on, they just walked in from the street. Investments involve risk, so please consult a qualified professional before making decisions.
All right.